Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to be with y'all. It's a real pleasure. My name again is Celina Moreno, and I'm an attorney with MALDEF. Just drove up from San Antonio, where our MALDEF Southwest Regional Office is based. We cover 9 states, but we are a national organization. And I like to say that we're headquartered in Los Angeles, but our heart is in Texas. We were founded in San Antonio, and we're getting ready to celebrate 50 years. We founded in 1968, so pretty soon. And just a little background for those of you who are not familiar with MALDEF. We are a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that specifically works on behalf of the Latino community living in the United States. We work in 4 major areas in education, voting, immigrants' rights, and workers' rights. And we work in the areas of litigation, public policy, here at the state capitol, as well as community education. And so really glad to be here with you today. I'm here with a good friend of mine and colleague, Yannis from the NAACP. And our organization, MALDEF, was actually modeled in large part after the NAACP. And so we're just a really proud ally. And today, the way that we'll break up the conversation is really to first talk a little bit. I'll talk about some litigation, kind of where we are at now with voting rights since the work that was done by including Congressman Lewis, and where we are now. What is the face? What do voting rights and voting rights litigation? What does that look like today? And then we're really going to encourage everybody here to join in. We have a coalition called the Texas Election Reform Coalition, focusing on statewide policy. Yannis is going to talk a little bit more about some of the bills that we're seeing already. But we have a bill tracker as part of that coalition, and we'd love for you to sign up. I'll pass around the sign-in sheet. I'll pass around the sign-in sheet later, so that anybody who is interested in following these bills and joining our coalition can do so. So as I was, before my drive here this morning, I was just to kind of get inspiration for today's talk, was just rereading the letter from Birmingham jail, and also the address that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March. And so a couple of things that just stuck out in my head before we get started, if I may just share. One of the things he said was that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 gave Negroes some part of their rightful dignity, but without the vote, it was dignity without strength. And something else that really stuck with me, especially as we are here to sit here today in the Capitol, is let us march on ballot boxes until brotherhood becomes more than a meaningless word and an opening prayer, but the order of the day on every legislative agenda. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the things I want to talk about. So please, I hope this is an open discussion. Feel free to interrupt me with questions. We'll try to answer as many questions online that we get. But hoping that, if there's things that I go over that are too easy and you guys say, I got this, let me know. And same thing, if there's anything that, warrants further explanation, please do let me know. So I want to talk a little bit, going back to, I mentioned the Civil Rights Act of 64, and right after that, the next year, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, one of the most powerful civil rights tools that we have today. And just on a kind of bird's eye view level, as many of you know, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race. And I'll just note too, for the Latino and Asian American communities, 1975 was actually just as important of a year as 1965, because that is when the VRA was extended to include language minorities who were kept from voting for that decade after the VRA was passed, and made it possible for, in addition to Latinos living in the U.S., and particularly Latinos and African Americans in Texas that dealt with literacy and poll tax, once we got to 1975 and the VRA was extended to language rights, It allowed protections such as translating ballots and translating, making sure that there was, in the covered jurisdictions, that is where there was this historic discrimination. And it's probably not surprising that the entire state of Texas is covered under both, under the 1975 extension. But it really allowed language minorities to be included in some of those protections. Section 5, I'm going to get a little technical, but I think it's such an important tool. Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act is perhaps the most powerful civil rights tools that we have. And unfortunately, after the recent Supreme Court decision, which I will talk about, that particular section, while not invalidated, was essentially gutted by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2013 by a decision called Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder. And just a little bit about what it does and why it's so important and why we need advocacy at the federal level to Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, is because this tool, what we call a pre-clearance provision, basically what it did was, in addition to the special language on provision on language, that this VRA, the Voting Rights Act, that core Section 5 provision, prohibited certain jurisdictions, and again, not a shocker that the entire state of Texas is covered under this particular Section 5. It basically prohibits certain jurisdictions from implementing any change impacting voting in elections without getting pre-approval from either the Attorney General, so the Department of Justice, or the DC Circuit Federal Court. And basically, you can't, so before, jurisdictions could not make these changes unless DOJ said that this change does not discriminate on the basis of race. And again, it only applies to covered jurisdictions, and Texas, for all the discrimination historically, but also in the last half century, where I know for MALDEF's part, every 10 years, we have filed suit on behalf of Latino voters for redistricting, for example. And not just Latino voters, we've done so with other plaintiffs groups, including the NAACP. And this is something that continues to be a problem. We're actually in a current redistricting case, but that just goes to show why these protections are still so needed. So Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder, the Supreme Court case in 2013 was largely, a dream coming undone, right? And it guts the Voting Rights Act, not by striking the pre-clearance provision, but by invalidating what we call the coverage formula, right? Which states or which jurisdictions are covered under this pre-clearance provision jurisdiction. And essentially, when nobody is covered because something's invalidated, that means that it's essentially gutted, right? And so what do we have left of the Voting Rights Act? The strongest provision that we have left since this has been gutted is Section 2. And what that does, it protects against discrimination on the basis of race in voting, but instead of having a pre-clearance and kind of, before anything goes into law, the DOJ has to pre-clear it and make sure it's okay, it requires affirmative litigation and an extreme amount of resources. Very expensive to litigate some of these cases. And so often policies that come into place will be in place for years before litigation takes its course. And so it is after the fact protection. But, one of the things that Section 2 does, it prohibits election changes that have a disparate impact against Latino, Black, and other minority voters. But it also says that if there's intentional discrimination, and if you can prove it, it's very hard to prove, but if you can prove that a particular city or state or county intentionally discriminated on the basis of race, what happens is there's another part of the Voting Rights Act where now that we don't have Section 5, you can actually bring these localities or states back into a pre-clearance. And so
what section is that?
That's Section 3. And so the mechanism is called bailing in a jurisdiction. So kind of clawing back. And I'm proud to say that in MALDEF recently just completed a two-week trial, and just last week got a decision in the first Voting Rights Act case that actually brought back in a locality in the country. And that was for Pasadena, Texas, where that city did pass a going back from the single member districts for their city council, now trying to bring back so that it's both single member districts and also at-large districts, so a hybrid system that dilutes the vote of the Latino population in Pasadena, particularly at a moment where the Latino population was increasing in population, and for the first time would have likely gotten 5 out of the 8 seats, so been a majority. But the mayor of that city, right after the decision, I mean, within a week said, oh, well, now we don't have to listen to DOJ anymore. We can do what we want, and passed that, went on to pass that ordinance soon after that decision. And so it has been in effect for a couple years. Already an election took place under that new system. But I am very happy to say that MALDEF won at the trial level last week. And the federal judge, a fairly conservative federal judge, said not only was there a disparate impact on Latino voters in Pasadena, but that there was intentional discrimination against Latino voters. And so what that means is Pasadena is now the first locality right here in Texas to be bailed in under the new era of the Voting Rights Act. And I want to I don't want to take too much time because I know that there's a lot to get to with other speakers, but I do want to hand out a New York Times article that came out yesterday that really does a good job of explaining how the Voting Rights Act works now, in this new era, and particularly using Pasadena as an example case. Let's see. So as I mentioned, just want to talk about a couple of other cases before I pass the computer and the mic over to Yannis. I'm very impressed, by the way, about how high-tech y'all are. It's really great. And so the redistricting case, that's, basically that case is against the state of Texas, MALDEF, NAACP, the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, many other individual plaintiffs groups, brought a case after, in 2011, after the new lines were drawn for Texas. Latinos accounted for 65% of the growth in the state of Texas, and were largely responsible for Texas gaining 4 new congressional seats, but did not see the benefits of that in terms of power in voting. And so MALDEF sued on behalf of Latino voters. Unfortunately, it's been 2 years since the last post-trial briefing in that case. It's in a San Antonio Federal District Court case in a 3-judge panel. And unfortunately, we have yet to get a decision in that case. It's been over 2 years since our last trial briefing. The trial was in 2014 on the 2011 plans. And so there was an interim court order that was certainly an improvement from the lines that were drawn in 2011. And that's what the elections that we've held so far, they've been using those maps. There is definitely still improvement to be made in that case, and so we are disappointed, and we have, with the other plaintiffs group, filed a motion for entry of judgment, which basically asking the court to rule in this case, else we will go to the Fifth Circuit and seek remedy at that level. So we are disappointed in that case, but that is something that we have been successful in previous redistricting cases in Texas, and hope to be here as well. And then the last case that I'll talk about is related to voter ID. And So voter ID, there's a current case going on right now, which if Yannis wants to talk a little bit, NAACP is actually currently involved in this case. MALDEF was involved in the original case filed in 2011. We got a successful court decision by the federal court in DC. Unfortunately, after Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder came down, Texas was allowed to continue with its voter ID, even though the court said that it was that it intentionally discriminated against Black and Latino voters. And so that's kind of where we are now with the voter ID case. That case, with that version, several plaintiffs groups, including NAACP and the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, brought suit, continued the case, and won a decision in federal court in Corpus Christi, saying that not only was there a disparate impact on Latino voters because of the voter ID law, but also that Texas intentionally discriminated against Black and Latino voters. That case was appealed to the Fifth Circuit. The Fifth Circuit agreed that there was a disparate impact and disagreed or needed more information and so sent the case back down to see whether in fact there is intentional discrimination. Why is that important? Because again, we have Section 3, that bail-in provision, so that if there is intentional discrimination that can be proven, that does set Texas as an entire jurisdiction for coming back under the pre-clearance provision, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So that's the big case that we're waiting on. During early voting, we saw that in Bexar County, where MALDEF offices are in San Antonio, we saw that the elections department there was still, unfortunately, posting bad signage, telling people at the polls, when reading them in line, saying that you cannot vote unless you have a voter ID. That is no longer the law based on that Corpus Christi court decision. And so we sued Bexar County and won, got a temporary restraining order against the county for them to immediately take down those signs and stop telling people inaccurate information that would suppress the vote. And so that's kind of where things are now. We saw some other things, unfortunately, in this past election, particularly to language minorities. And that was that many jurisdictions in Texas, many counties, did not have stuff posted on their websites, for example, in Spanish. And that's even some border counties. That's Harris County. So several major counties did not have their stuff posted in Spanish. And so that is something that we send out demand letters, and happy to report that several of those jurisdictions, including Harris County, did change their policies. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, but maybe we can do so at the end. I want to, before I turn it over to Yannis, I just want to pass out MALDEF's legislative agenda to give you a sense of what else we work on. And also, since many of you do probably work with the immigrant community here in Austin and other places in Texas, after this election, there are many questions about what to do now if you're an immigrant, if you're undocumented, in this presidency that we are about to face. And so here's an FAQ. I also have it in Spanish if it's needed, but it's meant for educators, for social service providers, and for everybody here. And so with that, I will pass around while Yannis is talking a sign-in sheet for our coalition. Some of the groups that are involved in the coalition right now are MALDEF and NAACP, ACLU, Disability Rights Texas, Common Cause, League of Women Voters, some business chambers, school board members, and many others. And so I invite Texas Impact to become a member, and any of you individually. And so we'll send around that sign-in sheet. And thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, how y'all doing? Yannis Banks, Texas NAACP. Been doing a lot of their legislative work and other work for them since 2007. It's been a few years. And as she mentioned, yeah, we've been partnering with them on many issues and lawsuits and just advocating here in the state of Texas. And I can go briefly into the voter ID lawsuit if you want me to, or we can keep going. But as she already highlighted pretty much where it's going, and right now where the different plaintiff groups are waiting to go back before the judge to hear what the new ruling is going to be. Because what happened during this November election was just a temporary thing. And if you're familiar with what that was, people to vote, it was just in place for November as a fix for what happened while they wanted the judge rule. The Fifth Circuit ruling was that the state should get a chance to fix the problem. And as the bills we've looked at filed during this session, they're not going that route. They actually, I guess, trying to make it stricter is what Lieutenant Governor Patrick has said is going to make it even stricter than what they had before, which I don't even know how that's possible, right? Because there was already ID laws. If not, this is before North Carolina, so I wonder if North Carolina is stricter than ours. But it's determined to be one of the strictest voter ID laws, if you will, in the state. So we're waiting to go back before the court to see what she's going to rule next, or how she's going to determine that. And of course, I'm sure it will be appealed as stuff to do with law, and then eventually it will probably end up at the Supreme Court, which we don't know how that court is going to look, really. So it should be fun when it comes to voter ID. But there's been bills that's been filed this session already to move forward with some of the election stuff. I think one of the more important bills, it was filed last session, it will start again this session, is the online voter registration. And it seems simple enough. I know with the work we do with our members, we do voter registration drives. I'm sure a lot of your churches may encourage people to go register or do voter registration drives. And how easy would it be if you can have your tablet or smartphone or what have you, and have people just fill out a form online, or just tell people you can go online on your own phone and fill out your voter registration form. You even see commercials sometimes on TV that says, go to this website to fill out your voter registration form and you can be registered to vote. Fun part here in Texas, you go to their website and it'll give you a link to print out an application that you fill out and then go have to mail, right? And we know human nature and how people are. The harder or the more steps it is to do something, the least likely they're going to do it. If you can just sit at home while you're watching your favorite program, or you're watching one of the Sunday services online, you couldn't make it to church, you can do it right there. The pastor just said, hey, you should register to vote. You just hit this tab button. I can still hear them talking, and I can register to vote. That would make so much sense. In Texas, stuff that makes sense doesn't always happen, right? So last session, it was like a delegation from Houston came up and talked about how horrible this would be. And it's a bipartisan effort to get this done. Representative Israel.
How horrible this would be?
They said it was horrible, pretty much. This would be drastic. It would be terrible for the state. One of the guys even said this is just to get Republicans out of office. This is just voter registration. I mean, it's not elections. It's not voting. Sylvia Israel, Rep. Israel here out of Austin, she had a bill filed. It was her, Representative Alvarado, and others. She had 76 co-authors, which, if you're familiar with Texas House, that's half plus one. So, which means the bill would pass on the House floor, right? It should. And so she stopped at 76 because she had the numbers. The bill could not get out of committee because of a delegation from Houston, Harris County, who came and testified about this would be terrible for the state. And they even tried to say, well, we couldn't keep it secure if you wanted to register to vote. How can you tell who's registering to vote is actually who they say they are? Well, the same way when I go see you in person, and you say yes and you put your information down, I don't check to see who you are, who you wrote on there. That's who you said you are. That's who we take. You have the information. We're good. You don't ask people for identification. We do voter registration drives, right? You give them a form, they fill it out, you check the numbers and everything is filled in, and you have a good day. They brought those points up, and the bill died in committee, which is where civic engagement comes in. Where your legislators, whether they're from the Senate or the House or the governor, or especially the lieutenant governor, how he runs the Senate, they need to hear from you, your delegations, your churches. Hear from you and say, this is important to our community, especially when they come home, because they do come home and go to church. So when they come to their churches, that's the best time to talk to them, right? Because they're in God's house and they're supposed to act a certain way. So the best time to talk to them and let them know how you're feeling about certain things is when they're there. They can't run from you, where if they're in the office, they can always hide and say, well, tell them I'm not here. Or, I'm going to sneak up the back door. There's no running away. I think it's one of the best times so you can engage with them and say, you're going to be in Austin for a few days. Here's how we feel back in your district, and keep this in mind when you're there, and not just go along with, no matter which party you belong with, what your party is saying. But like I said, that's a common sense kind of thing to do, right? Online voter registration, you think it would be, common sense, it would happen. But even with universal vote by mail, and this has impacted both parties once again, where right now, if you want to vote by mail, there's certain people who can, elderly class of automatic, I think it's over 65, if I remember right, you automatically can do voting by mail. Now, for other folks, if you're going to be out of district for early voting and on election day, you can vote by mail, but your ballot has to be mailed to an address that's out of district. So you couldn't have your ballot mailed to you, to your house before you went on vacation. You would have to try to give them the address beforehand to mail to you at that location and then mail it back. And there's other, I can't remember all the ones that will trigger that so you can do voting by mail, but there are those who believe that everybody should be able to vote by mail. As a matter of fact, I think it's Oregon who does.
Many red states.
Right. And Oregon is completely voting by mail. You can mail your ballot back and you're fine. I think even our soldiers here in Texas, they're able to do voting by mail. So, there's talk about, if you're not going to be home and it's going to be convenient for you, why couldn't you have a ballot sent to you before you left? Because you might be going on vacation, or we had an issue with folks. I had a buddy, actually, he lost his election because of the redistricting trial when we pushed back the primary date a few years back. He was in Prairie View, high student population for Waller County. Of course, the students were gone by the time the new election day came, and trying to get students to do mail-in ballots just at all. So, but I think Dan Branch had an issue with it. Former state rep Dan Branch up out of Dallas. He had an issue when he was running on the primary, during the primary for Attorney General, where he had folks who wanted to vote for him and they couldn't do mail-in ballots because they weren't old enough and they didn't meet the qualifications, the stipulations that they had, and it became a hassle for them. And I think they ended up not being able to vote just because of timing or what have you. So it benefits a lot of people. I think we can look at things that we're doing, and when it comes to voting, proof of citizenship can be a hassle. She mentioned the voter ID, the redistricting trial. My boss, state president, Texas NAACP, Gary Benson, was one of the lawyers for us during redistricting. We were in San Antonio for the 2011 round of the trials. It just so happens the trial happened on his birthday. And we went in the car, and his ID, he had pulled his ID out to show the guards. I saw his ID. I said, your license expired. And he's trying to get his license renewed because we're not in Austin. But it was the first time they added the proof of citizenship thing where you have to show a birth certificate or what have you. License renewed like he normally would, because he didn't have a birth certificate on him. And just that hassle and the cost of that, which is one of the things we highlighted about voter ID, is trying to prove who you are. The cost of getting your birth certificate is not cheap. Not to mention if you're not born in the state. So you have to pay for shipping and plus whatever cost, whatever state has. We've had people who run into those issues where it's not just simple, I'll run out the street and get it. It costs a lot. And so there's people who need help. And we know, hearing from y'all, they tend to listen a little bit better maybe sometimes, and hearing from me is just might be one point of view, but there's people in this building, they value the voice of the church, different church groups, and say, this is a religious issue, this is why we're doing it. And I think it's important to hear from y'all on some of these issues and let them know this is where we stand. You're out here saying one thing, but it's being preached another way. But I think y'all have a large delegation. You have a large group, large congregations when y'all all get together. And, if you come to understanding on different issues, we can definitely use your support. I would say for something like, same-day voter registration even when you go, or even same-day voting if you have to, but same-day voter registration, but even online voter registration. But I think everybody can see that that's just a common sense, easy way. She mentioned technology and how you have technology. As technology advances, we should not be so scared of it that we don't embrace it to see how we can utilize it. I mean, we have President-elect who was coming in, who mentioned about computers and is questioning the use of computers to do things because it makes stuff fast, but that's the world we live in right now where everything's moving fast. And we need to keep pace with technology and not get left behind to where we're trying to play catch up at some point. And by the time you try to catch up to the new technology, or which then will be old technology, because something newer will even come out. And so I think it's important that they hear from y'all. And as we honor Dr. King and others who has fought for folks to have rights to vote and just basic civil and human rights. I think we can't participate in this day and not realize and remember what they were all about, everybody being treated equal, but having rights and being treated fairly. And so, let's do things that make sense. There's some value in terms